So hello everyone. Today I'm speaking with Ken Bauer. Ken and I have known each other for 3 years now, working together on the board of the Flip Learning Network. And I will let Ken introduce his role in higher education. And plus I don't want to butcher the name of the university because I love to hear it said with that proper Spanish accent.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. So my name's Ken Bauer. I'm an associate professor of computing here at the Tecnológico de Monterrey in Guadalajara, large private university in Mexico. I think we're 30 campuses now. It keeps going up and down. I've been here for 24 years now. So in terms of education, my background is computer science, software engineering, and computing security mainly, but my main interest is over the last 7 years has been in educational technology, in open learning, a big participant in Flip Learning over these last years. I think actually we met Kelly 5 years ago at the FlipCon in Mars, Pennsylvania. We were in the workshop for higher education together back
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And then, so I've been involved in Flip Learning, chair of the board of the Flip Learning Network since 3 years ago now, and they won't let me go, so I'm still the chair of the board. And I have a big interest in that area as well as more lately in open educational resources and open educational practices.
Mm-hmm. So I reached out to Ken because we're thinking about some new approaches to how we might leverage social media in the classrooms for purposes of engagement. And the other thing that I know I've read some writings of Ken's on, excuse me, is using social media and other digital, ed tech tools to give students a voice who might otherwise not be so prone to raise their hands and speak out, as was always the way you had to be heard up until, say, 10 plus years ago. And, certainly one of the real benefits, I think, of education technology. There's so many tools, and there's a lot of question as to which ones are working best in what application. But that's a great one. I know you just spoke recently with Stacy Rojan, as I did.
Stacy's Stacy's podcast episodes come into my mind when you're talking exactly about that, Kelly. There's a lot about that in her book.
Yeah, so she's a big advocate of that. So let's start with, I've seen you use Twitter to engage your students. So why don't you just tell me a little about that?
So I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter and all ed tech tools as a rule. So here's the things I like about using Twitter for my class. Okay, you bring up the point about, I think it's really important to have lots of different methods of communication for students. Because some students are not comfortable with being the center of attention in the classroom around their peers. And we talked about that with Stacy, and I talked about that yesterday actually with a group from British Columbia. Giving students other options to communicate with their peer group as well as the professor is a win, almost always. We just got to be a little bit careful with cognitive overload and giving way too many options. And then there's the dichotomy of choice, and I don't know which one to choose. And I think sometimes as techno nerds, like some of us are, like I just closed Slack and Discord and a whole bunch of other tools I have open in the bar to not be distracted here with you, I probably have 10 channels of communication that I can receive information from students from. And not everyone likes that, and not everyone can do that. So that said, why Twitter? Twitter is an open tool in terms of anyone can create an account and anyone can watch what's going on in the Twitter stream of what everyone's publishing. I'm assuming, of course, that the students are creating a publicly visible account, not a private with a lock account that only their followers can follow. The advantages being, one, they can go for anonymity if they want to. And whenever you go into this online space, you need to think about there are students that are vulnerable and that they have a right to be anonymous. But if we're having an interaction between myself and Paula or whoever the student is, I need to know that Supergirl 463 is her. So that I can watch what's happening with her. But the big advantage to being out on Twitter is, one, they have a different way of expressing their voice. We can use hashtags to monitor the traffic of our conversation. So I would use hashtags from our courses, like my course codes here. It'd be TC2027. So I'd use a hashtag TC2027. Of course, pro tip, make sure you search that hashtag before you decide to use it for your event or for your course, because there might be content on that hashtag which you don't want to associate with, or it just pollutes your stream and you lose conversations. The big advantage, besides the fact that they have a different voice to reach me and their colleagues, and this is why you want to use something like Twitter as opposed to an internal tool, is it engages other people. So I will have colleagues of mine that follow me on Twitter, and will see those conversations either directly because they're watching me post to that hashtag and they go, hey, Ken's posting some of this hashtag. I don't know what that is. Let me search that hashtag. And then they'll notice I have a bunch of students posting to that hashtag. And then those colleagues that might be computer science workers in industry that I have contact with, or previous students, will reply to them. So that gets students really jazzed, because when you first start using Twitter, it's usually I'm posting and nobody is replying. Is this thing on? Nobody's answering.
That's great.
And so when you get either a Kelly answering or a Toby or a Karen or something answering a student's post, or uplifting them by saying, hey, that's a great idea, let me point you to this resource, or even just a retweet or a like, it really kind of motivates the student to do more. So that's the biggest advantage to Twitter. There's some disadvantages because some people don't want to be in a public space. And if you're going to use something like Twitter, you have to talk about that in the class, because I think a lot of us are privileged, especially being a white, cis, male. I don't have as much experiences of being trolled or anything like that. But some of our students will have that happen to them. It's guaranteed. And we need to be out front about, it's okay, it's not your fault. If this does happen, I'm here to help you, so that they know that I'm not pushing them into a toxic space and then being upset at me and the world, that we know that this could happen, and then do some tasks ahead of time for when it happens, because it's not going to be an if.
So you hit on a lot of great points there. Let's talk about some of those things and think about best practices a little bit. So just to be clear right up front, do you require, and I'm getting a sense that you don't require students to do it. If they don't, there'll be some other alternative digital means they could use. At the start there, we talked about too many different modes of communication, which is something I'm always concerned with as well, both on a personal level and institutionally. Do you have kind of a sweet spot, like, basic go-to tools, or do you just have a lot and pretty much here's my choice of 5, 6, 7?
So I've gone through all the options and trying to find the sweet spot, and I never find it, Kelly. For my classes, I tend to come into the course and we have a discussion in the first week about what our communication tools are, as well as all the other things we do in the first week of class. And I lay out here, I have a lot of experience doing this. I'm a systems administrator. I've been using these tools since the 80s and 90s. Here's what I use. This is why I like this versus that. And then I lay it out and say, well, let's make a choice. And the choice could be Twitter, it could be Slack, it could be a Facebook private group, it could be a Reddit channel, which might seem bizarre for some of our audience, but there's lots of options out there. It's a matter of choosing which one. The main factor that I found, and I think I wrote a post about this a long time ago when I went to Facebook groups as opposed to Blackboard forums, is go to where your students are. So if everybody already has accounts on Facebook and they're not like anti-Facebook, like that's happening to some of us lately, maybe a Facebook private group is the right place. Also, what is installed on this device that they have in their hands all the time?
Right.
And if we're going to require them to install yet another piece of software or an app on their phone, and they don't want to, they're not going to.
Yep.
And so for the example of we use Slack a lot in our communication is if people don't have this on their phone, they're not going to see that Slack message until Monday afternoon when they happen to run the Slack app on their desktop or open up that web page. So that's a big determinant, is deciding which tool the students will all have on their mobile devices, assuming that they all have mobile devices, which for a lot of us is pretty well in stone, although you got to be cognizant of some people that don't have that, or they have a feature phone that doesn't have apps on it. So that's my driving factor there, Kelly. But yeah, I don't require using any of these tools because I'm very aware, being a security professor, about issues with privacy, issues with vacuuming up of our data by these companies. And if someone takes a stand that, no, I'm not going to create a Facebook account, I say congratulations, and let's actually discuss why and open that up into the conversation in our class. So yeah, it's tricky.
Gotcha. And that is, it's all right, an interesting point. So anybody listening to this, right, because you're already teaching tech, that's a bit of a leg up in terms of facilitating these conversations. I assume that kind of like the LMS and email is sort of the default fallback, right? So
yeah, but people under the age of 35 pretty well don't use email anymore. It's the thing they have to log into to check their course stuff.
Right. So
it's ask your students, how do you organize parties? The answer is not going to be email.
Right. So the LMS is then the kind of the baseline. So if somebody doesn't want to do any of these other social media things, then I assume the expectation is they're going to at least use the LMS when there's a requirement to provide some kind of, text or input.
And it's all how you use the LMS and how good you are. Some people are amazing at using their LMS well, and some people just use it as a place to put the homework assignments and collect them.
And the syllabus.
Yes. The required document at the beginning of the semester.
Yeah. So how about, you mentioned the idea that, and it sounds like you're open to it, that a student does not have to have a self-identified, use their name to necessarily create the account, particularly if they want some anonymity. So what do you do there? You just ask students, hey, listen, create it how you want. If your personal email's behind it or your school email's behind it, that's up to you. Just let me know what the account is.
Right. And then we also have to enter into discussion. And this goes to me using blogs, which is a different topic. I allow them to blog anonymously. But then we have to have the discussion in the classroom that, hey, Sarah decided to use a pseudonym for her blog or her Twitter handle or something. Please don't out her. Because then there could be a reply. Yeah. Oh, great idea, Sarah. Oh, you just exposed her ID. So you got to have that conversation if you do have someone who's hiding behind anonymity. And it's a good discussion to have anyway.
So in terms of your use of these platforms, is it largely just around dialogue, or do you often have more structured, you can find plenty of write-ups out there on the web where people talk about this structured approach they took. You had to do this in Twitter, and then you had to make a list, and you had, follow this linear set of steps. Do you have occasional assignments like that, or?
I don't recall doing a specific assignment towards it. What I use these tools for is, as we talk about the P in the 4 pillars of FLIP being a professional educator, and L being learning culture, what I'm trying to do with my students in this environment, and even faculty when I give courses about using Twitter for their professional development, is remove that I only think about my class in that hour and a half or 3 hours per week when I'm in session for my class. I am a student of this computing course this whole semester and maybe continuing on behind, and how I cultivate my learning or just awareness of the topics that we're looking at in this course. I don't want to use the word 24/7, but I'm thinking 24/7 that I'm a student of this course all week long, not just those 3 hours that I'm in class. So showing them how to use Twitter not just to post to and as an assignment, but it's something I'm using to educate myself about what's going on around me, whether it's the topic of my course or the world in general. And that gets to teaching them how to not just watch the wall that's coming by. And Twitter's actually got the default now. It's like your top tweets as opposed to timeline view. And I always switch it to timeline view because I'm old and that's the way I like it. But showing them how to use TweetDeck or some other tool so they can see lots of different hashtags or use Twitter lists, which I'm actually not very good at using, but there's lots of ways to use these tools to filter the content that you're viewing. And so getting the students to be a full-time student and not just during my class time is the main thing I'm trying to do there.
Well, that's excellent. I wish more of us were doing that. Some questions about your environment, because that plays some role. So how big are your class sizes typically today?
So I have the luxury of class sizes are traditionally, I'd say, averaging about 25 students to 30. I have about 100 students per semester assigned to me in my 4 groups.
So I assume it's doing some of this is probably more challenging with a small, 4, 5, 6 student class.
Challenging, but then there's more motivation to do it, because then you're creating a larger surface of ideas by putting it out on the public internet and having them involved with others. Because the idea is you don't want them just talking to each other in a vacuum. Putting them out on these public spaces means you can involve others. And one big benefit I've had in doing, say, blogging or using social media over various years and using consistent hashtags or consistent mostly hashtags, is my students find the work of my previous students, or
I
my
was going to ask that, right?
Publications of the current students, and then there's that crossover between semesters.
Yeah, it's funny because my default thinking was kind of like creating a hashtag that's unique to that specific section of that course, but you mentioned you're just using the course code, and then I thought that's sort of, okay, so now there can be this long-term view.
Right.
That's
what makes it, I think that's where you get a benefit for those small classes, is you can bring in the larger dynamic. Yeah.
Yep.
There would be an advantage to using a unique code for a group, but then you're segmenting your population, and there's pros and cons to doing that, like anything else.
So yeah, where I am, we have 3 distinct sort of segments. We've got the traditional age students in our day sessions, which are 15-week sessions. Then we've got an adult population, 5 8-week terms every night or every year, and an online population. Our adult and online populations tend to be small and be smaller size classes. Right. And of course, it's a different age group. It's a different level of experience, although in just the 10 years that I've been there, I've seen that, change rapidly. Their adoption of technologies has really picked up, but it presents slightly different challenges in these different things. Are you working predominantly with traditional age college students?
Yeah, so here in undergrad, we are, actually in the US, I would say traditional has actually changed completely. So we can't even say that the 18 to 22 segment is traditional anymore in the States, especially. Yeah. But yeah, here in Mexico, that's one thing I've noticed is we tend not to have any older students in my classes like I would have when I was in Canada studying in the 80s, where we'd have lots of people coming back to retrain, and especially in computer science, which I studied, was a popular degree program for lots of people trying to get back into the workplace.
Yep. Yeah. So any other particular unique uses of social media that you've come across with colleagues that kind of come to mind as just something to explore and consider? I know I'm putting you on the spot there.
No, it's, I think it's really important for all of us, whatever discipline you're in, is creating a larger net of your input sources. Whether it's for your discipline specific, like finding out what other people are doing in your discipline. But I think a solution to a lot of the problems we have in the world is the fact that we need to be more aware of different cultures, different thoughts. We need to be aware of the privilege that a lot of us have in our own settings. And breaking out of a bubble is important. Of course, a lot of these social media tools the algorithms are designed so that you're only seeing content that's similar to what you're liking and publishing and seeing. And it's really important, I think, to break out of that bubble. And even, and this is actually interesting for Twitter and other tools, just because I follow someone doesn't mean I endorse that person. Because I actually specifically attempt to follow people that have differing degrees of thoughts of what I have, because I want to try to force myself to see those different points of view. So be careful judging people by looking at, it's actually a cool tool when you teach people to use Twitter the first time is you see someone post something, you go, okay, you click on their profile, you're going to look at who they follow, you're going to look who's followed them, you're going to look, are people that follow them people that I trust in. There's a whole thing about how to cultivate your people that you follow. But be careful judging someone based on who they're following because they might not follow someone just because of their beliefs. It might be
Sure.
As opposed to. And so I think that's a really important reason for us to use these tools is to open our perspectives on the world.
Yeah, and it's such an important lesson for students to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
That you know, you really want to have a way to see different perspectives if you really want to be open-minded and be learning. One last question. So, you know, going back to this idea of student engagement and giving people their own voice, any particular specifics, and you don't have to use names, but, you know, any stories that come to mind where you really saw that work well for a student?
Oh, sure. So Fredel, who was one of my students in a computer security course, who there was this thing that happened, I guess it was almost 3 years ago now, where there was a big DNS outage. And DNS is the service that when you type www.fliplearning.org, to use an example, there's a number associated with that name, and that there's some service that has to translate name to number, and then the internet works for you. And that went down like really, really bad. And she compared that event to people going to a taco stand and everyone screaming which tacos they wanted, the taco person. And the taco person just freaks out and they're like, I can't do anything because there's so many requests. And that's called a denial of service attack. And that's what actually created that problem. And so she was publishing a lot of things on her blog like that, which was interesting. There's other stories about her, like her mom followed our hashtag, and her mom loved the fact that she could follow the work that we were doing in this course because it's not her area. She's a psychologist. And she liked to follow what we were doing in our class because we were doing it in the open. And this is about being an open educator. And then she read the blog posts of the students. She told me that she loved seeing the work of her daughter because it's a view of her daughter that you don't get inside the home.
Yeah.
We don't get to see what our kids are doing in school. And so this putting it out in the open allowed her to see what was going on with her daughter's education and her classmates. It was interesting because she followed me and I thought, who's this person who's following me? But she actually recorded a video for me. So if you do a Google search for, I think it's called Giving Students Voice. It was a session that I gave. Brian Alexander was actually there in the room. And there's a video of Fredel in Spanish, but there's a video of Tanya, her mom, in English talking about this. So there's that. But another case that happened with Fredel is we watched a keynote event and something happened. It was from Digital Learning, Digital Labs, Digital Pedagogy Labs had an event, and we watched part of it. And then they started publishing about that event. And I mentioned it in a Slack channel that I am involved with Virtually Connecting. We're connecting all the channels. And then Gardner Campbell happened to be in an event in one of our Slack channels. And he's a very famous educator from Virginia. And I mentioned, oh, I'm really proud of these students' posts. And here's a couple of examples. And he went and he commented. And the fact that something happened on the open internet, that someone commented on a student's work, got her so excited she ran straight to my office and said, this person, and so this makes a lot of motivation. A third story about Fredel, and I'm not sure it's completely true, but she got an interview with Oracle to get a job there, and the person who was doing the hiring says, I've been reading your blog. And
wow.
He also was a professor here, so there was a connection there as well. So I'm not entirely sure of the veracity of the blog got her a job. But the blog got the fact that she's interested in computing security in the eyes of this person who was a recruiter or a hiring manager for Oracle Corporation, who approached her and said, oh, I've been reading what you've been writing about this. So having your voice and making yourself visible on the public internet, whether it's through a blog or Twitter or whatever, does have advantages for our students. And so for Fredel, there's 3 cases of just that one student. I'll admit that's probably the most extreme case I can pick out of all of my hundreds of students. but it works and it happens. And there's a lot of good success stories there.
No, that's great. And it's a perfect way to wrap up the discussion. So
wonderful.
Thanks so much for taking the time to chat about this with us. And we'll see you out there online.
Cool. Thanks, Kelly. Have a good day.